You should be grateful I let you stay on the team. Most managers would have fired someone who complained as much as you do about credit and recognition. My boss, Margaret Harrington, said across her mahogany desk, her corner office gleaming with awards for innovations I had created, her wall displaying plaques bearing her name for client wins I had orchestrated. The way I see it, your ideas only have value because I bring them to the executive level. Without me, you're just another junior analyst with opinions nobody important would ever hear. I sat in the visitor's chair I'd occupied for 5 years, absorbing yet another lecture about gratitude while she prepared to accept another accolade built on my work, and I made a decision that would take 18 months to execute, but only 30 seconds to deliver. But why did I smile and thank her for the feedback instead of quitting on the spot? And why, at the Executive of the Year award ceremony 18 months later, did 300 industry leaders scan a QR code I held up during her acceptance speech? And why did Margaret Harrington never work in our industry again? The QR code linked to a website I'd spent 6 months building. 5yearsofstolen.com. The domain was registered anonymously. The hosting was untraceable. The content was devastating. 5 years of documented theft. Every email showing I'd originated ideas Margaret claimed as her own. Every file with metadata proving I'd created work she'd presented. Every client communication demonstrating I'd managed relationships she took credit for. The website loaded in 3 seconds. By the time Margaret finished her acceptance speech, 300 people had seen everything. The documentation had started accidentally. In my second year working for Margaret, I'd complained to a colleague about an idea she'd stolen, a client retention strategy I developed that she'd presented to the board as her own innovation. "Can you prove it was your idea?" my colleague had asked. I couldn't. The original email had gone through Margaret, who'd edited my name off before forwarding it to executives. The presentation had been reformatted with her branding. The trail led to her, not me. Then it's her idea now. That's how this works. That conversation changed everything. The documentation system I developed was comprehensive. Every email I sent went through my personal account first, timestamping my original thoughts before they entered the company system. Every document I created was saved with metadata intact: author name, creation date, edit history that proved the progression of my ideas. Every meeting where I presented concepts to Margaret was followed by a personal note summarizing what I'd proposed, sent to my own email as a contemporaneous record. I became obsessive about evidence, paranoid about attribution, meticulous about creating a trail that couldn't be erased or edited. For 5 years, I built an archive that documented exactly what Margaret Harrington was doing. The scope of the theft was staggering. Year 1. The client retention strategy that saved $2.3 million in projected losses. Margaret presented it to the board. I received no mention. Year 2. The process innovation that reduced production time by 40%. Margaret published an industry article about her methodology. My name appeared nowhere. Year 3. The relationship with Meridian Industries that became our largest account. Margaret took every client call after I'd built the initial connection. She accepted the Business Development Award for landing a client I had cultivated. Year 4. The crisis management approach that saved the company during a public relations disaster. Margaret gave interviews about her leadership during the crisis. I was mentioned only as her team. Year 5. The strategic vision document that shaped the company's 5-year plan. Margaret presented it to investors as her roadmap for growth. 90% of the content came from my original proposal. 5 years. 17 major innovations. 32 client relationships. 0 attribution. The grateful conversation had happened at the beginning of year 4. I'd made the mistake of asking, carefully, professionally, whether I might present my own work at the upcoming board meeting. Margaret's response had been immediate and crushing. "Your work? Let me explain something about how organizations function. Ideas become valuable when they're elevated by someone with credibility. I have credibility. You have potential that only matters because I choose to develop it." The retention strategy was my analysis. The retention strategy was a company initiative led by the senior team. Your analysis contributed to that initiative. There's a difference between contributing and leading. but the original concept. The original concept means nothing without execution at the executive level. I execute. You contribute. That's the arrangement. It doesn't feel like a fair arrangement. Fair. Margaret had laughed. You should be grateful I let you stay on the team. Most managers would have fired someone who complained as much as you do. The decision to expose her hadn't come from anger. It had come from watching her accept the Innovation Leadership Award at an industry conference 6 months after that conversation. I'd been in the audience, invited to attend, expected to clap, positioned as a supportive team member celebrating her boss's achievements. The award was for the process innovation I'd developed. My innovation. My hundreds of hours of analysis, testing, and refinement. Margaret had accepted the Crystal Trophy with a speech about her commitment to operational excellence. She hadn't mentioned my name. She hadn't mentioned anyone's name except her own. And as I'd clapped along with the audience, I'd realized something fundamental. Anger would pass, but documentation would last. The website took 6 months to build. I designed it to be irrefutable. Each claim was supported by evidence. Each piece of evidence was cross-referenced with additional documentation. Each section included timestamps, metadata, email headers, the forensic trail that proved my assertions weren't just claims but facts. The homepage was simple. For 5 years, Margaret Harrington of Patterson Industries has accepted credit, awards, and recognition for work created by her team, specifically by me. This website documents the theft. Everything is verifiable. Everything is true. Below that, a navigation menu. The Retention Strategy, 2019. The Process Innovation, 2020. The Meridian Account, 2021. The Crisis Management, 2022. The Strategic Vision, 2023. Supporting Documentation. How to Verify. The How to Verify section was crucial. I'd anticipated that people would question my claims. Margaret had powerful friends, industry connections, a reputation that would make many people reluctant to believe she was a fraud. So I made verification easy. Every email included full headers that could be authenticated. Every document included metadata that forensic analysis could confirm. Every timeline was supported by multiple independent sources. I'd even included contact information for colleagues who could corroborate specific claims, people who'd witnessed Margaret taking credit, who'd been present when I'd originated ideas, she later claimed. The website wasn't a complaint. It was a prosecution. The Executive of the Year nomination had been the final trigger. Margaret had been selected for the industry's highest individual honor, recognition of her transformative leadership and innovative vision over the past 5 years. The nomination committee had cited specific achievements: the retention strategy, the process innovation, the Meridian Account, the crisis management approach. Every single achievement they'd listed was my work. The ceremony would be attended by 300 industry leaders, executives, journalists, board members, the people who shaped careers and reputations in our field. It was the perfect audience. The planning was meticulous. I couldn't simply stand up and make accusations. That would appear unhinged, emotional, easily dismissed as a disgruntled employee's breakdown. Instead, I needed to create a moment of controlled revelation. The QR code was elegant in its simplicity. A single image that anyone could scan. A direct link to evidence that spoke for itself. No yelling. No screaming. No dramatic accusations. Just the truth, made accessible to everyone in the room at once. The ceremony was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. 300 guests in formal attire. Crystal chandeliers. A stage with professional lighting. The trappings of achievement and recognition that Margaret had pursued her entire career. I sat in the audience, my usual position, the supportive team member expected to celebrate her boss's success. Margaret was seated at the head table, her acceptance speech prepared, her designer dress carefully selected, her expression projecting the confidence of someone about to receive her greatest honor. She had no idea what was coming. The presentation preceding her award was lengthy. A video tribute to her career. Testimonials from industry leaders who'd worked with her. A highlight reel of the achievements that had earned this recognition. I watched my work scroll across the screen, attributed to someone who hadn't created it. The retention strategy graphic I designed. The process innovation flowchart I developed. The Meridian case study I'd written. All of it presented as evidence of Margaret Harrington's brilliance. The award presenter was Marcus Wellington, CEO of Meridian Industries. The irony was almost too perfect. Marcus was presenting an award to Margaret for an account relationship I had built, a relationship that existed because I'd cold-called his company 6 years ago, developed the initial proposal, and managed every aspect of the partnership until Margaret had inserted herself as the senior contact. Margaret Harrington represents everything we value in industry leadership, Marcus said. Vision, innovation, execution. Her work with Meridian has been transformative for our organization. Her work. My work. The distinction had been erased so completely that even the client believed the lie. Margaret approached the podium with practiced grace. She accepted the crystal trophy. She smiled for the photographers. She arranged her notes for the acceptance speech she'd been preparing for weeks. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you to the awards committee. And thank you to everyone in this room who has supported my journey. I reached for my phone. The speech continued with predictable self-congratulation. Margaret talked about her commitment to excellence, her dedication to innovation, her belief that leadership meant empowering others to achieve their potential. The word team appeared occasionally, always in the abstract. Specific contributions were never attributed to specific people. She was, even in her moment of triumph, incapable of acknowledging anyone but herself. The moment I chose was deliberate. Margaret had just said, "The strategic vision that guides Patterson Industries today is something I'm particularly proud of. It represents everything I believe about where our industry is heading." The strategic vision I had written. The document that had been my intellectual property before she'd stripped my name from it. I stood. Standing in a seated audience draws attention immediately. People around me turned, curious about the disturbance. Margaret paused, confused by the movement in the crowd. I didn't speak loudly. I didn't need to. If you'd like to know who actually created the work Margaret is being honored for tonight, scan this. I held up my phone, the QR code filling the screen. The moment lasted perhaps 5 seconds. 5 seconds of silence while people processed what was happening. 5 seconds of confusion while Margaret tried to understand why someone in her audience was interrupting her speech. Then the phones came out. 1 person. Then 5. Then 20. Then so many that the sound of 300 people simultaneously photographing a QR code created its own audio signature. Margaret's voice cut through the noise. I'm not sure what's happening, but I'd like to continue. The website explains everything, I said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. 5 years of documentation. Every email. Every file with original metadata. Every piece of evidence showing who actually created the work you're being honored for. The murmuring in the audience grew louder. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. This is highly inappropriate. Security. The evidence is already distributed. 300 people have the link. Whatever happens to me, the truth is out. I didn't wait for security. I walked toward the exit, moving between tables of people who were now scrolling through their phones, reading the documentation I'd spent 5 years assembling. Behind me, I heard fragments. Is this real? Look at these email timestamps. The metadata clearly shows. Oh my God, look at the Meridian section. Margaret attempted to continue her speech. I apologize for that interruption. There are always people who are unhappy with others' success. But the audience wasn't listening anymore. They were reading. The website traffic spiked within minutes. The 300 ceremony attendees became 3,000 within an hour as they shared the link with colleagues, friends, anyone in the industry who might be interested in what they'd discovered. By midnight, the website had received 47,000 visitors. By the following morning, it had been covered by 3 industry publications and 2 mainstream business outlets. The evidence was overwhelming. Journalists who reviewed the documentation confirmed that the metadata was authentic. Email headers matched the claimed timestamps. The progression of ideas from my original concepts to Margaret's presented versions was clear and irrefutable. Industry analysts who'd praised Margaret's innovations began issuing corrections. The awards committee that had selected her began an immediate review. The company response was swift. Patterson Industries issued a statement within 48 hours, announcing an internal investigation into the concerns raised about attribution and credit. Margaret was placed on administrative leave pending the review. I received a call from the CEO requesting my side of the story. The investigation took 3 weeks. Forensic analysts examined 5 years of email records, document histories, and collaboration logs. They interviewed 37 employees who had worked with Margaret and me. They reviewed performance evaluations, meeting notes, and project documentation. Their findings confirmed everything on the website and revealed additional instances I hadn't even documented. The termination was quiet but definitive. Margaret Harrington was fired from Patterson Industries for systematic misrepresentation of work attribution and violations of company policy regarding intellectual property credit. Her separation agreement included a non-disparagement clause. She couldn't publicly criticize the company or dispute their findings. The Executive of the Year award was rescinded. The industry response was more severe. Margaret had built her career on a reputation that was now revealed as fraudulent. Every achievement she'd claimed was now suspect. Every reference she might provide was now tainted. Companies that had considered hiring her withdrew interest. Speaking engagements that had been scheduled were canceled. Consulting opportunities that had seemed assured evaporated. The professional network she'd spent decades building turned away from someone whose credibility had been destroyed. My own trajectory changed dramatically. The documentation that exposed Margaret also established my expertise. Every innovation she'd stolen was now properly attributed. Every client relationship she'd claimed was now connected to my name. Recruiters who'd never heard of me suddenly knew exactly who I was. Companies that valued the work Margaret had taken credit for wanted the person who'd actually created it. Within 6 months, I'd accepted a position as vice president of strategy at a competing firm, a role that recognized my actual contributions rather than treating me as an invisible resource. The aftermath had unexpected dimensions. Other employees at Patterson Industries came forward with their own stories about Margaret's behavior. The pattern of credit theft had apparently extended beyond me. She'd been stealing from her entire team, building a reputation on the accumulated work of people she'd systematically diminished. The company implemented new attribution policies. Documentation of idea origination became standard. Credit in presentations required acknowledgement of contributors. The Harrington Protocol, some employees called it, the procedures designed to prevent what she'd done from happening again. Margaret reached out once, about a year after the ceremony. An email to my personal address, obtained, presumably, through mutual connections. What you did destroyed my life. I hope you're proud of yourself. I considered the message for several hours before responding. What I did was document the truth. Your life was built on taking credit for other people's work. When that foundation was revealed, it collapsed. That's not my doing, it's yours. I never heard from her again. The ethical questions lingered longer than the practical ones. Had I done the right thing? The public nature of the exposure was designed for maximum impact, not just to correct the record, but to ensure Margaret faced consequences she couldn't avoid. Was that justice or was it revenge? I'd thought about this question for the entire 18 months I spent building the website. Justice, I decided, required proportionality. Margaret had stolen 5 years of my professional development. She'd presented my work to industry leaders, accepting recognition that should have advanced my career. She'd built her reputation by erasing mine. A proportional response meant exposing the theft to the same audience that had witnessed it. The 300 people at the ceremony were exactly the people who needed to know the truth. The distinction between justice and revenge wasn't always clean. There was satisfaction in watching Margaret's face as she realized what was happening. There was pleasure in seeing her reputation collapse. There was vindication in being recognized for work I'd created. But the primary goal had never been her destruction. The primary goal had been truth. The evidence I'd presented was accurate. The documentation was authentic. The claims were verifiable. If the truth destroyed her career, that was a consequence of her choices, not my revenge. The career I built afterward was different from what I'd imagined during those 5 years under Margaret. I'd learned lessons about documentation, attribution, and the importance of controlling your own narrative. I'd learned that waiting for recognition was less effective than creating it. I'd learned that systematic preparation could overcome unfair power dynamics. The vice president role I'd accepted came with responsibilities for developing junior talent. I made attribution a central principle, ensuring that good ideas were credited to their originators, that innovation was recognized regardless of seniority, that no one on my team would experience what I had experienced. The opposite of what happened to you, one direct report observed.
Exactly.
That's the whole point. The website remained online for 2 years. I took it down eventually, not because I regretted the exposure, but because the purpose had been served. Margaret's reputation had been corrected. My work had been attributed. The industry understood what had happened. Leaving it up indefinitely would have shifted from justice to cruelty. The lessons from those 5 years shaped everything that followed. Document everything. Trust but verify. Understand power dynamics before challenging them. Build your case before making your move. And most importantly, the truth is power, but only if you can prove it. Margaret had assumed that her position protected her from accountability. She believed that seniority conveyed ownership, that presentation trumped creation, that visibility was the same as value. She'd been wrong. The QR code moment became something of a legend in industry circles. People who hadn't been at the ceremony heard the story and embellished it. The 30-second interruption became a dramatic confrontation. The quiet walk to the exit became a theatrical departure. The reality had been smaller, simpler, more controlled. A woman standing in an audience. A phone held up with a QR code. A website that told the truth. That was all it took. Margaret's complete disappearance from the industry happened over approximately 2 years. The first year, she attempted to rebuild. She reached out to connections, proposed consulting arrangements, tried to reframe her story as a misunderstanding or workplace conflict. The documentation made these attempts impossible. Anyone who considered working with her could verify the evidence independently. The metadata didn't lie. The timestamps didn't lie. The email headers didn't lie. By the second year, she'd stopped trying. Industry databases that had listed her accomplishments were corrected. Conference panels that had featured her were retroactively reattributed. The professional identity she'd spent decades constructing was systematically revised. She didn't just lose her career. She lost her history. The final piece of closure came 3 years after the ceremony. I received a message from a young analyst at Patterson Industries, someone who joined after my departure and Margaret's termination. I just wanted you to know that your documentation saved my career. My new manager started taking credit for my work last year. I showed HR your website, they'd archived it, and explained what I was experiencing. The company took it seriously because of what happened with Harrington. The pattern was recognized. The behavior was stopped. The website had become a reference, a precedent, a warning about what happened when credit theft was documented and exposed. Thank you for telling me, I wrote back. That's exactly what I hoped would happen. The 5 years under Margaret had been difficult, frustrating, professionally damaging in ways that took years to fully understand. But they'd also been educational. I'd learned that power without accountability is temporary. That documentation is protection. That the truth, properly assembled and strategically deployed, can overcome institutional advantages. I'd learned that patience isn't the same as acceptance. That waiting for the right moment isn't surrender. It's strategy. And I'd learned that sometimes the most effective response isn't yelling or screaming or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's a QR code. Asterisk every project, every innovation, every client win. She put her name on it. When I complained, she said I should be grateful she let me stay on the team. So I documented everything. Every email, every original file with my metadata. Every piece of evidence that proved what she was doing. When she won Executive of the Year, I was invited to clap in the audience. Instead, I stood up during her acceptance speech.
I didn't yell.
I didn't scream. I just held up my phone with a QR code and said, "Scan this." By the time she finished her speech, 300 people had seen the truth. The website documented 5 years of theft. Every claim was verifiable. Every piece of evidence was authentic. She lost the award. She lost her job. She lost her reputation. And eventually, she lost her entire career. The truth has power, but only if you can prove it. I could prove everything.